Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the rebroadcast of the interview with John Anthony West. I do have this on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, TuneIn. It's pretty much everywhere. But the spreaker file is missing for some reason. I have no idea why that is. So I've kind of remastered this for you guys. And this was the interview I did with John Anthony West. Some people call him Jaws. Who could really use your support right now, by the way, in his fight with cancer. This interview is pretty much everything that my show is about and what I'm looking for into the paranormal as well as spirit science. I would say that this interview takes up half of the message and the journey of this show. And me and John getting a pretty cool discussion. So I think you guys will enjoy it in your spare time. If you get time, really listen to it. And he has a lot to offer. So here we go. Let's get on with it. Tonight, we have a very special guest on, John Anthony West, and I can't be more excited. I'm sure I've said that a million times. If you guys seen it on the Facebook page, I'm stoked. And he is an author of the famous book Serpent in the Sky, and well known for his documentaries, The Mystery of the Sphinx and Magical Egypt, and much more. I believe Mr. West shocked the Orthodox academics by showing what he believes in evidence, that there is much more to the ancient Egyptian story and timeline than what has been previously discovered. He's also given many lectures across the globe and will be presented as a feature speaker this year at CPAC 2016. And that is a conference. It's a conference on precession and ancient knowledge located in Rancho Mirage in Southern California. That's going to be, I believe, on the 30th and the 2nd. He can tell me if that's right or not. He is all on the 2nd of October and September the 30th. He is also one of the most sought-after guides for Egyptian tours and frequently gives awesome tours in Egypt. And you can grab a seat whenever available at, I say jawest.net, but it's JAWEST.net. I mean, I've got a lot more here. What he calls them quackademeics, you know, but I believe Mr. West has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that science alone cannot prove the origin of man. And thanks to the work of Mr. West, we are one step closer to finding man's true origin and design. And it's a real pleasure having you, Mr. West. How are you doing this evening?
Very well, Joe. Thank you.
So what did you think about that big, fat introduction, huh? I bet I left a million things out about what you've done.
You did, but if you were talking, if you put in the whole track record, there wouldn't be any time left to actually have an interview. So you did fine. You got all the main points in. The trips to Egypt, which in fact, that's what provides me with a living. My own work doesn't, strangely enough, even though I'm living proof that fame and fortune do not necessarily go together. I sometimes think I'd rather be an unknown billionaire, but actually I wouldn't. The fact of the matter is, anyhow, so the work is out there, and it's there for one and all to see. And one of the important things of these Egypt trips, it's not just, I do them for a number of reasons. Financial is only part of it. The other is that Egypt is the only place on the face of the planet where people can go and actually, after 2 weeks, understand what ancient civilization was like when it really was civilization and before it was what we call progress, which is actually shiny barbarism. And it's that actually all kinds of things. You could apply this to almost anything, music, art, whatever. But in Egypt especially, when I give lectures, I often start them off by saying that Egypt is like sex. That gets everybody's attention, the magic 3-letter word. But actually, see, you're already interested.
Yeah.
It's actually not, it's literally true in the sense that you can read all about sex, and that's a certain kind of information. And you can look at pictures, that's another information of a different sort, it's emotional information. But until you've experienced it, you cannot understand it. You just know about it. You don't understand it. Music is like that. Somebody told you about music. You say, well, yeah, it's frequencies and it's this and that and notes and key signatures and so on. But you wouldn't understand a thing about it until you actually heard it. So Egypt is like that until you actually go there and spend a couple of weeks and you see it through this symbolist point of view, which when I champion, I didn't invent it. I'm the mouthpiece for the great genius with the unpronounceable name R.A. Schwaller-Dulevich, who put together this extraordinary symbolist interpretation called Symbolist Egypt. And when you see Egypt, when you go there for 2 weeks and actually experience it, you come back really understanding that the baloney we call progress is really no more than shiny barbarism. And what they had back then was in fact civilization. Then it gets very complicated. Why did it die? Why did it disappear? And so on. These are big questions, and we go through those questions at length on the trips. Anyway, if you think this is a pitch to take my trip, you're right, it is. But it's more than just that. And there is time, anybody interested and listening, there is time to sign on to the upcoming trip, which starts on October 20th.
How many trips do you take a year, you think, to Egypt?
Normally I would take 4, give or take. But since 9/11, and then even more so since the revolution of 2011, it's been difficult to put 4 trips a year together. But generally speaking, it's 4 trips.
It's pretty safe, though, right? I mean, for the most part. Yeah.
It's a lot safer than anywhere in this country. I mean, any American who's afraid of going anywhere other than maybe Syria or Pakistan is living in delusion. What could be more dangerous than this stupid country where you don't know, you send your kid to school and somebody's blowing up the school, or you try to go to a nightclub and somebody's bombing out the nightclub. I mean, no place is more dangerous than here. So and this is all that people are afraid of this is entirely the responsibility of the media, who I call the prostitutes.
Yeah, there you go.
These are whores, whose job it is to kind of jerk people off into believing that all of these places, that it's all civil war, that particularly any Muslim country, it's all terrorists, and it isn't. That stuff is going on here and there. Yeah, it does, but it goes on here too.
Yeah, no doubt.
Even then, I mean, if you look at statistics, I just wrote a couple of pages for my website. I don't even have it up there yet, but about the safety factor. I mean, you just asked the question. How many times have you driven down the road and all of a sudden there's a smoking wreck in front of you, and the ambulances are there, and you see that this only happened a couple of minutes ago? You can tell because of the nature of the situation. And you think to yourself, wow, 10 minutes earlier, that could have been me. But it wasn't you. It wasn't you. And you just drive on without giving another thought about it. I went and I did a little bit of research. I live in the Hudson Valley in New York, which is probably about as safe an average kind of American county, X number of people, I don't know, a few 100,000, most basically rural, plenty of wilderness. That's a cool place to be. It's Catskill Mountains out right outside my back door. And you look up the statistics, it was something like, on average, there are 1,400 people here killed every year in auto accidents. That's a lot of dead people.
Yeah.
How much damage do the terrorists do? Overall, they don't kill that many people. Wars kill that many people, but it's really wildly overblown. And I mean, I don't know if you ever saw it when George W. Bush stole the second election. Some brilliant guy. I wish it had been me, but I applaud other people who do brilliant and clever things. And I don't have the graphic here now, but if you're going to do this, if you're going to show this show as a
As a video. Yeah. By the way, I forgot to mention, guys, this is the first one I'm doing as a video, so go ahead. Sorry.
At some point, I will get to you a thumb drive with some visuals to put behind this. Anyway, there's this wonderful, I don't know if you saw it, right after Bush stole that second election, somebody redrew the map of North America. And I tweaked this a little bit. I improved it. But the original was that all of the red states were labeled Dumbfuckistan.
That's right.
And all of the blue states were labeled America. Or there was another version of it where it was called, blue was Canada as well, it was called the United States of Canada. This is incorrect. And I had it redrawn, or the graphics redrawn, so that the red states are greater Dumbfuckistan and the blue states lesser Dumbfuckistan. But it's all Dumbfuckistan. And once you recognize this, you start being able to take a realistic view of what's going on. And then you go into the history and all this to make America great again. Who the hell are they kidding? I mean, it was great when there was slavery and they were murdering all the Indians. Really great.
I mean, it's obvious Egypt's had a much more evolved spiritual and outlook and aware society than we do right now. I mean, every presidential election, it's like you're watching the Muppets up there, and I can't believe it. I'm watching it going, how are we polarized? They're polarizing us to choose a side, and we're killing each other. I mean, I wouldn't vote for Trump if somebody put a gun to my head, but, I'm just saying, how is this happening? We're not enlightened. We can't be.
This is Dumbfuckistan. In fact, in this case, I have a lot of astute people, friends of mine, who actually think that Hillary is in fact more dangerous, overtly less insane, but maybe even more dangerous. And this is a good argument. Whatever the case is, however it falls out, Dumbfuckistan will get a candidate worthy, will get a president it deserves.
That's right. Yeah. Which one's more likely to start a nuclear holocaust? I mean, even the guy's psychologist said he was a sociopath. I mean,
yeah, but the other one is too, and she's got a record of starting wars.
Yeah, she gets pretty evil too.
She's got to start a war a year. She goes into menopause or something.
So when the moon's right, when the moon hits that time, it controls it, doesn't it?
This is a dangerous, dangerous woman. So what you have is on one hand, I mean, Trump comes across like a Dr. Frankenstein reject. I mean, something that didn't make it out of the laboratory because they put in the wrong brain. And the other one is the queen of the vampires. This is a scary lady.
Yeah.
So, anyway, let's get on to something like Egypt.
So, man, that's pretty funny. So what you call the quackademeics, I mean, these guys, these academics that still stick to regular, the Egyptian stuff we're taught in school. I mean, what points do you actually, that you do agree with them on? Like the major points. Are there major points about Egypt that you actually do agree with what the academics say?
Well, it depends what you mean by major points. In other words, the facts are large. In other words, the pyramids of this are so high, or these dimensions, the facts, the history, so-and-so was king from Pharaoh, from such and such to such and such. These things are mainly true, but it's the interpretation that is completely, categorically, and demonstrably false, and more than false, fraudulent. They do not understand what is going on, and the reason part of the reason why they don't understand what's going on is that they are by nature, scholars by nature, in fact, scientists by nature, are, even the good ones, are fundamentally not creative. And not creative people cannot understand what creative people do with their lives or how it works. It's why, and I wear two hats. I don't know if you know this. Probably you don't. We don't know each other, and I don't know how much research you did. I didn't start out as a scholar. I started out
as a screenwriter, and a novelist, yeah.
So on. And because I realized before I even had a name for it that I'd been brought up in a lunatic asylum, and now I have a name for it. I didn't invent it, but it's Dumbfuckistan. This is the crazy. and my initial intention was to be the little child that says the emperor has no clothes. And that's what I set out to do through my writing. And then through a long series, we don't have enough hours. If you were on, if you took one of my trips, we'd spend a few hours, and I do a kind of an autobiographical rap on the bus back from Abu Simbel, because people always ask me, how did I get into this? And it's a long story how I got into this.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I became acquainted with the Gurdjieff work. I don't know if you know anything about that, but anyway, that's
great mystic.
That's my basis, as it were. That's my school. I mean, my school where I attend is not my school. That's what I'm.
You're referring to the mystic side of like the dancing and all that stuff, as far as you know.
This is extraordinary. This is extraordinary stuff. Mm-hmm. Anyway, no time to get into that, but at a certain point, I became acquainted with his work, and that led me by a series of steps to ancient Egypt, because he's always talking in his work about Egypt as one of the great lost civilizations, not necessarily first, and not necessarily even the onlyest, but that was one of his focal points of interest, and I got very interested in that. And I was living on the island of Ibiza. You know about that?
Oh yeah, Spain.
Oh well, it depends how old you are.
Right.
If you're too young, you wouldn't know about it.
Right now, it's just a big island to go dance and party and rave and stuff. That's all you hear about, you know.
It was then too, except that there were lots of people, with considerable number of people with real talent, writers and painters and artists of various sorts. And yeah, we partied. I was there in the early partying years before it became what it is today. And there, again, more long story, but I got interested in this kind of work, and that led me to England to participate in one of the Gurdjieff schools. And in doing that, I'd had a novel published and some plays done, none of which made any money. I had some good reviews and things like that. But if they'd made money, I probably never would have switched into the scholarship. And I didn't switch. I still do. I mean, one of my chief interests is still the creative side of what I started out doing. But with the scholarship, I got interested. I had a novel published, and my editor, I got friendly with the editor at the publishing house, who was a Cambridge-trained mathematician turned publisher, because he couldn't make money as a mathematician. And we got interested. We got talking one day in a pub in England, and the subject of astrology came up, which I'd been studying. Again, just been studying, no intention of doing anything with it. And he said, "Oh, that's a bunch of codswallop." And I said, "Well, no, Andrew, actually it's not. I know quite a bit about this subject, and I tell you, there's some evidence out there, much of it indirect, but some of it direct. And if you put it all together, you could put forward a case for astrology." And he said, "Well, that would, let me see." And I brought in some documentation, and he said, "Well, I'm not 100% convinced, but this is certainly interesting. Would you do a book on it?" My standard reply for questions like that is, "Yay, pay me some money and I'll do a book on anything."
Well, I mean, right. Yeah, that's, yeah.
I would not, for example, having been offered the job, ghost written The Art of the Deal for Donald Trump. I would draw the line at something like that. Yeah. Or somebody asked me to do a book about Hillary Clinton as a sex symbol. No, you couldn't get me couldn't get me to do such a book.
That's anyway, only for the readers that get involved with Dumbfuckistan, isn't it?
Well, right, not for me. Anyway, so suddenly I had to do this book on astrology, and I had to become a scholar. And in doing the research for that book, I came across the work of the amazing genius with the unpronounceable name, R.A. Schwaller de Lubix, and his book, Le Temple de l'Homme, which means the Temple of Man, in which he develops this symbolist view of Egypt that proves that it is not, as the quackademeics would have it, a bunch of genius architects and artists producing work that is fundamentally superstition. In other words, they dismiss the entire philosophy and the philosophy, the science, the religion itself of Egypt, while acknowledging that, well, yeah, hey, these are some of the greatest artistic masterpieces that ever were. Well, only uncreative people can put forward a stupid-ass thesis, hypothesis like that, because if you are a creative individual, you know that stupid people, really stupid people, and thick, cannot produce artistic masterpieces. They just plain don't. They may not be nuclear physicists or something of the sort. Our minds don't work that way. But anyway, so Schwaller came out with this extraordinary hypothesis, and I was working on the astrology book at that time, doing all of my research, and I couldn't find a copy of the Temple of Man, which had not been translated. So, in fact, I found that the British Museum, the library at the British Museum, had one copy of it. It was impossible to find a copy to buy, in French, of course. And I didn't speak French, but I just sat down. I got fascinated by it. By this time, I was, enough of a professional to kind of not have to read something to understand its value. Just as if you're a professional baseball player, you don't have to watch the whole game. You don't have to watch somebody go through a practice to understand if the guy knows the sport or not. You watch him take a few swings of the bat and field a couple of balls, and you know if the guy knows the game. Or if you're a musician, you don't have to listen to 3 hours of somebody playing something or another. You listen to a couple of minutes, and it tells you if you're a pro, if this man or woman can handle the instrument. So with me, I mean, I don't have to read a whole book usually. I look at a few pages. That tells me if this is serious professional work or not. So with Schwaller, even though it was in French, and I had only entry-level French, I just kind of riffled through the pages, and I realized that he had done something of enormous value. He'd reconstructed and reformulated the great sacred science of the ancients in such a way that it was acceptable, it was accessible to our over-rational modern intellects. It's still, raw Schwaller is difficult. There's no doubt about it. And now it's all translated quite brilliantly, actually. But it's like, just as you don't take your first driving lesson in a Ferrari, if you have any sense. So Schwaller is like that. It's difficult work, but it is there, all of it. And it's the demonstration of the sophistication and the profundity of the civilization that was ancient Egypt, and that kept intact for 3,500 years. Now, if you think that out, that's the 3,500 years. Dumfuckistan is falling apart before our eyes after just a couple of hundred years.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
There's no doubt about that. And if you imagine or try to imagine, it's almost impossible that Egypt, even in without going into the very ancient civilization that gave us the Sphinx and that earlier stage of civilization that is so critical to demonstrate academically and from a scholarly point of view. But even the dynastic Egypt that goes back about 3,500 BC, that's almost twice as long as from Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ to us. It's almost unimaginable to us.
And that's your whole point about the regular academics in science too, is that based on the weather erosion of the Sphinx, that any geologist, any good geologist will tell you that that's real, that this stuff goes back further than we could possibly imagine. Yep. And then there's no way of knowing, but it all seems like it seems like based on the symbolism that you studied and showed us that there's definitely something to it, especially in the if you study, obviously you study Gurdjieff. If you study any mystery school, you see the symbolism, everything about their symbolism, maybe except for the Kabbalah, which I believe that's kind of tied into it a little bit too, but you see it all, you know.
It's all there. That's right. It's all there. And it requires not just, it requires, Lubitsch had a good line for it. It requires the ability to think with the heart, not just with the head. Modern science and modern scholarship, in fact, the whole of what I call the Church of Progress, the credo of the Church of Progress is that everything is material. There is no divinity. Religion is all absolutely bunk. There is no spirit. There is only matter, which conglomerates insensibly out of vast universe full of gas. They're the ones who are full of gas, actually. But
yeah.
But this is their point of view, and that point of view is pernicious, because even though they don't express it, sometimes they do express it. Literally, it means that our lives are meaningless. That, okay, there are better times and worse times, and it's nice to have a car and blah 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 blah. But basically, the center of the church, the dogma of the Church of Progress, depends upon two things. One, that we're the most advanced beings that ever lived on the face of this planet, with our hydrogen bombs and our bobblehead dolls and our nerve gas and our striped toothpaste. We're the best there ever was. And the other is that fundamentally life is meaningless. And all of the ancient civilizations, Egypt included, are based upon a very different philosophy and a very different practice that is easily expressed but incredibly difficult to do. Egypt is a one-issue civilization. Everything is directed toward the immortality of the soul, eternal life. All of the religions are based upon that. In Christianity, it's called salvation. And the Eastern religions, it's called samadhi or nirvana, depending on what. In Kabbalah, I forget what it's called in Kabbalah, but it's there, even though you don't normally associate that with Judaism. So, but anyway, this understanding, this point of view, and it's more than a point of view. It's an emotional thing. If it's just in your head, it doesn't do. If it's just in your head, nothing makes any difference. It really is here one day and gone the next. It doesn't matter. But if it's written into your soul, as it were, that your life, individually or our lives, individually and collectively, have meaning, and that we're here for a reason, which is to achieve this higher level of consciousness called, as I said, salvation, or whatever term you use it for, whatever the specific religion, life gets lived individually and collectively very different. And it's my absolute conviction that no real civilization is even possible if a secular philosophy is what governs everything that happens. The best you can do, which is a lot better than what we have here in Pakistan, where we have a lot of phony religion and a lot of crazy coming around. But in the Scandinavian countries, for example, Norway and Denmark and Finland and what's the other one? Denmark. That's the best, pretty much the best that a secular philosophy can give us. And it's not bad if you go to these places. I mean, they're infinitely more civilized and genteel and comfortable, and people aren't begging on the streets. And I mean, it's really unbelievably superior to what we have here in Pakistan. But strange, it's dead.
You better be careful, John. People are going to start labeling you a subversive or somebody that hates America or something. You know, anytime somebody stands up and I know why you say this, because it hurts your heart to live in a country that's this way, because it could be so much more. But when you're saying things like that, you'll get a lot of people going, oh, he's a subversive or he hates his country. And I don't think that at all. I think you're just telling the truth right now. That's all there's to it.
I don't hate this country. I detest its government and have very little respect for most of its population. But no, I felt this from the very beginning. As I said, I realized at the age of 13 that I'd been brought up in a lunatic asylum. And if they want to call me a subversive, good. In fact, I hope it really irritates them. All this PC bullshit that goes on now. You're afraid to offend anyone.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm all for offending people because, in fact, it's a great spiritual lesson, offending people, because it may be the only spiritual lesson a lot of people can ever understand, because mostly they're too stupid to understand it. But,
have you ever done a debate, like a live debate on some kind of, I don't know, an academic thing, or where you and maybe a quackademic is going at it? I would love to see that. I've seen Graham Hancock do it, but I would love to see you do that.
Yeah, I've done a couple of them. Graham's a good friend. And but see, the difference is Graham's very good at it, and Rupert Sheldrake is quite brilliant at it, actually.
Yeah.
But he's very gentle. I'm not. And also neither of them. See, I have a leg up on this kind of a battle because I'm not a scholar or a scientist by trade. I'm really a satirist, and the scholarship is I'm a scholar by default. So I come at these things from a completely different point of view than they do. I mean, I'm out for the throat, and I love it when I get those guys. They tend not to invite me to debates, but I'm pretty good at it.
Well, I mean, we need that a little bit. We really do. We need more of that.
But to get back to this thing of taking offense, this is the goddamn liberals that everything has to be, no, don't offend anyone. No. Right. No, my opinion is it's better. The more people you offend, the more they might learn if they understand that, this is to paraphrase Gurdjieff, whoever and whatever presses your buttons is your master.
That's right.
Period. No, it doesn't matter if you're right. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Only that whoever controls your emotional reactions is your master. If you understand that, you've understood. It doesn't mean that you've yet learned it. It's very difficult to learn. It means that you've understood that you live your life as a slave, because you're always, everyone, I'm not saying you personally, I mean just in general, that until you know this, you are having your buttons pushed, whether it's by the right wing or the left wing or whatever wing it is. If you're getting offended because somebody called you a queer, or somebody called you a nigger, or somebody called you something else, if you get offended, you lose. Period. You lose. Doesn't matter how wrong the other person is who called you these things. You're his slave, basically, and he can, or she can, control you by just offending you. They can make you do whatever you want. And then if you want to make up with such people that you've offended, you go down and say, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean this, and all the rest of it. And they say, okay, nice guy, okay, blah, blah, blah. No, the point is, once you're offended, if you get offended, to realize you've been had. And that's it.
I got to tell my pop that, man. My dad, he'll get to talking about Trump, and he'll get so red he looks like he's about to blow up, because he just doesn't understand why they vote for him. You know, he doesn't get it, you know. And I tell him it's the same reason why people vote liberal. You know, people are polarized real easily, and they're our masters. Like you say, if they're controlling us that way, then they are our masters. That's what they're doing, you know.
That's right. And with Trump, it is from another point of view, it's almost, you can understand how people get attracted to this reject from Frankenstein's laboratory, but it's still hard to process. It's still hard to get into their skin to understand how anybody can believe this oaf, this vulgar, stupid ignorant and vicious.
You can't come up with a name for it. Yeah, I understand.
No, it's sort of an overall. Anyway.
Well, I got to tell you, one of my main goals in life is to go to Egypt with you, and I've got an account I'm putting back for it, and hopefully I'll have that thing tapped, and then I'll be able to do it. It's I mean, for the average person, it's pretty expensive, but I believe it's worth it. I believe it's so worth it. I mean, when you go there, are you bored, or do you learn something new every time you go? I'm talking about you, not the tourist. Or have you seen it all?
Exactly. No. I always learn something new because I usually have very intelligent people with me, many of whom have some sort of expertise in one discipline or another that applies either directly or indirectly to Egypt. And then people see things with their own eyes. So often people will point things out to me. I mean, I learn something on every trip, sometimes rather important things. And it's also it's very satisfying for me, deeply satisfying to see people get their eyes opened by this absolutely unbelievable civilization, seen in the kind of depth that we see it in. And as I said, Egypt is like sex. So for Egypt, it's civilization that's at stake. When you come back from a couple of weeks in Egypt, you really understand what Egypt, what a civilization once was like. And you understand that what we have and what we call progress is nothing but shiny barbarism, some of which has its own uses on a practical materialist level. I mean, even though I'm basically, almost a card carrying Luddite, and see little virtue in most of our technology. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, I would rather go to a 21st century dentist than a 21st dynasty dentist.
Right.
And so there are lots and lots of things out there that I wouldn't want to do without, but they have to be put in their place, and their place is secondary to the philosophical, the emotional, the spiritual quest for immortality. That's which involves a higher level of consciousness that we normally can't access, but do sometimes. Great art sometimes puts us in touch with it. That's what art is about. That's what Beethoven, the best Beethoven, Bach's B minor Mass, and Monteverdi's Vespers of 1610, and all of those incredible architecture of Egypt. When you go in there, you understand, even if it's not verbalized. On my trips, of course, it's verbalized because we see it through symbolist eyes. But even if you're just there as a tourist and you're listening to the guide talking a bunch of bullshit, even then, if you have your eyes open, or you at least have your emotional center a bit open, you get it. I mean, you understand that this is something that our own society is absolutely devoid of. It's totally absent. I mean, we have Walmarts and they have the Temple of Luxor and so on. And only the experience of Egypt drives that home. So, yeah, so that's with the trips, and for me, that's the payback. I mean, apart from paying the mortgage, but it's hugely satisfying to, at the end of a couple of weeks of people saying, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. And they carry that with them and they pass it on to other people. So it makes ripples, and, it's going to change. It's not going to, at least in the immediate future, it's probably not going to make much difference in greater or in lesser Pakistan. But
no, it's not at all,
But ideas are very powerful. And there's the famous line, you probably know it. It's Victor Hugo, the French poet and writer of the 19th century, who said there's one thing more powerful than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come. You know that line, right?
Yeah.
Well, what Hugo didn't say, and probably never occurred to him, is that the second strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time has not yet gone. And since in the real world, formally or de facto, all the armies in the world, whether they're military or scholarly or scientific or agricultural or even cultural, all of those armies, and they are real armies, are literally committed or in the service of the idea whose time has not yet gone. So that's what makes it so difficult when you get back to the Sphinx. Talk about the water weathering and so on. This should have been established when this first came out with this 40 years ago. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
I've always wondered that, I mean, why hasn't anybody... I'm not saying that you guys didn't discover something great, because you did, but it's been there the whole time. How have we not seen it? How come have they just go, well, that looks like weather erosion. Just keep going, follow the line, don't even worry about it. I mean, something like that should wake everybody up and go, wait a minute, I mean, why do you think we just passed that up like that?
You would think. In fact, when I finally I developed this theory. Well, first of all, it's a single line in a book by Shvala Lubitsch, in one of his ancillary books called The King of the Pharaonic Theocracy, Sacred Science, The King of the Pharaonic Theocracy, now translated into English. There's one line where he's talking about the Egyptian understanding or insistence that their own civilization went back much, much further than what's usually credited with, 3500 BC. And he goes into a long scholarly discussion of demonstrating that the scholars around the Greco-Roman period of Caesar's time were convinced of this, and they had their, understanding, talking to the Egyptian priests of the time and all of this. And then almost as a throwaway line, he came out with the observation that the Great Sphinx of Giza was weathered by water and not by wind and sand. And I, reading that, I'm sure he didn't understand himself. He died about a year after he wrote that book. He didn't understand himself that this was the bombshell, that this was, if he could prove that, I got it. That was my epiphany, as it were.
Yeah.
And I understood that if you could prove that, you would be forced to rewrite the entirety of what we believe is ancient civilization, because it would mean it's not just the age of the Sphinx. It would mean that the most spectacular sculpture on the face of the earth and the temples around it, which were built of gigantic blocks of stone, a quarter the size of the room I'm in here, huge stone, 100 tons, slotted into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, that this is a technology that we couldn't reproduce today. And it's bad enough if we understand what an enormous thing this is, even if it were 3500 BC. But if it's pushed back thousands and thousands of years because of the water weathering, it means that there's a civilization in place at that time that's capable of feats of technology. The flower of our civilization is our technology. That was in place. That means that everything has to be written, all the garbage that we've learned in school having to do with the past and with this obsession, this fixation that we have upon progress that went from here to there to there. This is one of the reasons why Egypt is, you might say, deliberately misunderstood, because it throws into it in and of itself disproves the basis of the Church of Progress, that it goes in the civilization goes from primitive old cavemen who managed to build the Temple of Luxor and the pyramids while they're at it, primitive old cavemen with our brilliant selves, with our hydrogen bomb and our worldwide pollution and all the rest of the planet destroying stuff that we're currently engaged in and are likely to stay engaged in. But this is one of the things, go back to this idea, the idea whose time has gone, whose time has come, and the idea whose time has not yet gone. This is the battle, and this is what I'm involved in, and my colleagues, not just me. There are a number of us out there, and I'm thinking that we're probably progress is very slow in this thing. I mean, you read the papers and you look at what the quackademics are talking about, and God help you, go to an Egyptological symposium and watch the dullest people in the world talk about the stupidest stuff in the world. You wonder, Jesus, how can anything change in the middle of this? And yet, there are signs that it's not futile, that it can happen, maybe within our lifetimes. And me, that's my stamping ground, as it were. That's what my life is committed to.
Everything that I've studied as far as esoteric stuff goes, I mean, every single thing that I've studied, from Freemasonry to Kabbalah to astrology, even to the Arcanum, to, sacred geometry, to the planets, to, the astral realm and the astral light, there's nothing in that doesn't seem to go back to Egypt. And I was, going to ask you about astrology, that I know that you'd written a book, The Case for Astrology, that you talked about earlier. So your interpretation of astrology, well, let me just ask you this. Do you believe that those things that are in the sky, according to the Egyptians, including the moving objects like the planets, the stars, the galaxies, the nebulas, that they're all up there, that they're not just this scientific thing that just happens, like they're up there for a purpose? Or maybe the planets are controlling, I mean, if the moon controls certain things, I would think that other planets are also affecting other things, right? According to the Hermetic axioms of cause and effect,
Yeah, that's actually the part of astrology that's pretty demonstrable. It's the part that isn't that demonstrable, or anyway not demonstrable in scientific terms, is the reading of the horoscope. But the basic premise that there is a connection between the movements of the stars and the planets and sun and moon and so on affects life on Earth, or let's say even precipitates events on Earth. That's the more important evidence. And in fact, when we get to Egypt, there's important work coming out shortly. One book by a friend of mine, good friend of mine, and then other works that how shall I say, that participate in this grander scheme that is developing, because it's becoming absolutely clear. And even in quackademia, really, it's the other day, 3-4 days ago, finally, after 150 years of people being laughed at, saying that these ancient structures, like, and specifically Stonehenge, are astronomically oriented and are, in one way or another, sort of planetariums, that they're very important structures whose purpose is almost entirely astrological, in some sense or another, that they're designed to be oriented at certain stars and at certain phases of the moon, and even cycles of the moon that are 17 and 19 years. And this is becoming now unchallengeable. And then the question comes up that, for example, there's one of this amazing structure in Egypt called the Osirion, a very fantastically powerful underground temple, very mysterious. And this good friend of mine is about to publish a book. Actually, it's accepted in quackademia. In fact, it'll be coming out of Brown University, where he's showing that the symbolism in this extraordinary structure is based upon reconciling a whole series of astronomical cycles of sun and moon and precession and zodiac and so on, in such a way that the whole thing, see, otherwise it's very different. If you got into it a bit, and I'm not an astronomer, but the sun and the moon follow their separate cycles that seem to be completely separate from each other. And yet there are reconciling points. And the ancients understood these things, that there are X number of cycles of the moon, 25, that match X number of cycles of the sun when they all come together. And this was of immense importance to them. They understood all of these things, and then they constructed their entire society. Or anyway, let's say they constructed all of their temples in such a way that they reflected, or that they incorporated, these rather abstract and seemingly meaningless numbers and cycles. And now then comes the question that my friend doesn't get into either, but then the question sort of automatically arises, which can't be answered at the moment. Why are they doing this? In other words, you know what precession of the equinoxes are, right?
Yes, yes.
You know. So even a thing like this, it's proved demonstrably. You can't mistake it. This is what's so frustrating about dealing with quackademics. In a book in 1968 by two people, historians of science with absolutely impeccable credentials, Giorgio de Santillana and Herta van Dekend, who are they're historians of science at MIT University. I mean, you can't get more.
No, you got to have some real brains to go there. You know,
you can't be more respectable than that. And they came out with this extraordinary book called Hamlets Mill in 1968, proving that ancient mythology, they're not even dealing with the temples. They don't have that information yet, but they're proving that the knowledge of the precession is part of the star lore, or the mythological, the legend lore of virtually every society in the world, even so-called primitive societies and traditional societies. Now, then you have to ask, which they don't, because they're in enough hot water as it is, just suggesting such a dangerous thing, that the ancients actually knew about precession, which we only, well, the Greeks discovered precession. I forget who it was not forget the name of the Greek, Anaxagoras or something. Anyway, 3rd or 4th century BC, something of the sort. And I'm sure he didn't discover it either, because the Egyptians knew about it long before that. But you have to ask yourself, the sun precesses 1 degree in 72 years. Now, how the devil is anybody going to notice that, and why should they? And what makes it important, so that they base their entire society and their entire symbolism and mythology on this is a part of the of their lore, of their esoteric wisdom. What makes it important? We don't actually even know that. We just know that they did do that. And you then have to ask yourself, who's going to sit around and watch the sun precess 1 degree? In other words, if, let's say, you take this equinox of the spring equinox, and you put a stick up, and you see that the sun, you line the sun up so that it's exactly facing at the spring equinox. It then takes 72 years for it to move it's 5 degrees. 5, yeah. Well, basically, it's 5 degrees for it to move this one tiny little bit so that it starts moving away from the position that it was in to begin with. The cycle takes 25,920 years to go around. So this is very slow movement. How would they notice this in the first place? Who's standing there for 72 years watching the sun go 1 degree?
That's always amazed me. You're talking about, and this was in magical Egypt, the cycles of the ages, what they called, that happens every 26,000 years.
That's right.
That we go through stages of consciousness, and then it resets, and it goes, and it's all having to do with the cycles of the solar system. I mean, yep. I've heard a lot about that, and it's fascinating. And I think like you say, the Egyptians knew something about it, but somebody had to Somebody had to have taught them this stuff. I mean, to me, I would think, unless they got it directly from, I mean, there's no telling. Maybe they got it from above or something. I don't know, but they knew this stuff. I mean, you could tell their monuments and everything. They're lining up exactly with the stars or the pyramids or the Orion thing. How could they do all this? And how can we ignore it? How does it just get ignored, that they knew this stuff? Well, it should be the one thing everybody's trying to figure out. That's what I think.
I think so, but you've not been involved dealing with the quackademic minds. And these are very, as I said earlier, these are very uncreative people, and they are also they're intellectually unadventurous, and they're emotionally retarded. Their hearts don't work. Charlie used to talk about the what do you talk about it? The heart of the mind. No, he had a very wonderful term for it. Thinking with the heart. They don't know how to think with their heart. Their hearts are closed, and they're proud of it. That's strangely enough. So they don't know, and they don't want to know, and they're afraid to know, and it doesn't affect them because they're emotionally defective and spiritually dyslexic, and they call that reason. So, and they control the show. They're still in charge of it. And the prostitutes of the media go along with them. So this is the idea that actually it's the second strongest thing in the world, the idea whose time is not yet gone. But you're asking the question, how can they not do it? And I'm saying that the reason that they won't do it, and they also can't do it because it doesn't register with them. It's like you don't talk, put it this way, you don't talk about music to the deaf, and you don't talk about moonbeams to the blind. There is no point in doing that. They can't get it. And they don't want to get it because in their world, if you're blind, well, you're blind, you don't see anything. And if you're deaf, you don't hear anything. So these are the people who have actually taken control of the system over the course of the last couple of 100 years. There were plenty of things that were going wrong before that, but this is what it's like. To put it into another context, I said you don't talk about music to the deaf, and you don't talk about moonbeams to the blind. You absolutely don't talk about sex to eunuchs, because they just get angry and sometimes violent. But when the eunuchs take over the palace and convert or exalt their terrible disability and call it reason, the empire is doomed. And this is dumb Pakistan. And I'm not talking just about America. This is the entire Western world is in the grip.
The mentality as a whole, you mean? Yeah.
This is what controls the school system. This is what controls education and what we call education, which is a catastrophe. The less education, I have a good line. To quote myself, modern education or Western education is to the mind what AIDS is to the immune system. The more exposure you have to it, the more likely it is to be fatal.
Well, you would think that the people that, obviously, this, you could see George Washington with his Masonic apron, and there were several Masons that created this country.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that they they cared about those types of things, that they wanted that for this country, that they saw maybe the next Egypt here. And and it's done everything in opposition to it, it seems to me.
They did what they didn't understand, however, because as far as I know, the Masons keep certain things secret. But as far as I can tell, I know a number of Masons and give talks there, sometimes the Masonic lodges and so on. What they had lost over the course of wherever they got their knowledge from in the first place, which is, I think, Egypt, but not directly, indirectly over the centuries. What they lost was that it was a discipline. You can't just have some Masonic rituals and go through these rituals and so on. It's this whole idea of, as I said, of a higher consciousness and the immortality of the soul. is not something you can think about or just perform certain rites and it's going to happen. It is a discipline like learning to play the violin or learning to play Major League Baseball. It's something that has to be done all day, every day. This they had lost, even though they were relatively clued in compared to the nincompoops that we have around today. This is,
Well, I mean, even back in the ancient Egyptians, the kings and pharaohs, according to what I've read or studied and listened to, really, they had to have been enlightened, even though they had their priests or whatever. Some of them have to have been at a certain spiritual state? It wasn't just about, who and so son, or I might be thinking about a different society other than Egypt, but it would seem the way that they show the symbology of their kings and stuff, that these kings, they might not be immortal, but they were definitely enlightened,
Almost enlightened almost means immortal. If you're enlightened, the chances are that what makes you enlightened is that you've arrived at a state of consciousness that is not subject to physical death. That's what enlightenment means, actually. And yes, they had to have been those kinds of beings. Otherwise, it wouldn't keep a society going for 3,500 years. It doesn't last that long unless the people on the top are worthy. And with Egypt, it went up and down. It was sort of in waves upon the shore. It was at its highest point very early in dynastic Egypt, pyramid age, supposedly 2,500 or so BC. It was absolutely at its height, and it never got to quite that level of artistry and perfection and precision. Again, we're talking about 3,500 years, so the stuff of the New Kingdom is fabulous. It lacks. Doesn't have the power that they had. They had at their fingertips 1,000 years earlier, and then gradually, as Egypt went on, it never lost it completely. And then, when Egypt disappeared and fell to the Romans, and the whole religion crumbled and dribbled away, even there, the so-called Hermetic arts that, in fact, fueled the Renaissance. All those separate things of astrology and alchemy and magic and symbolism and sacred geometry, all of those different aspects that were once part of a total whole, filtered down over the centuries, sometimes underground, sometimes semi-public, but they gave rise eventually to the Renaissance of the 13th and 14th century. But even throughout the whole thing, the church itself, though God knows that the institutionalized church was a bloodbath right from the beginning, nevertheless, within the monasteries, kept hidden away somewhere, the flame was kept burning. Otherwise, they could never have built those incredible cathedrals. And even before that, the Romanesque churches. See, this is, again, even without Egypt. I mean, in Egypt, you really get this onslaught, but everybody really could find a way to get to Europe to see, particularly the Romanesque and the Gothic cathedrals and the Gothic cathedrals, particularly in France, where the great Gothic works are. To me, that was a big epiphany when I was 21 years old and it's in the army, stationed in Germany, and walked into the Cathedral of Chartres. All by myself. I was traveling around by myself on furlough and walked into this place absolutely empty on a November morning, and nobody was there, no tourism around in those days. And this thing just bowled me over. I understood that somebody at some point or another really understood something of immense importance. But strangely enough, even though it was a genuine mystical experience brought on by this fabulous piece of sacred art, it still took quite a few years before I actually started putting the question to myself, well, what was it that allowed them to do this amazing stuff? It was another 7 or 8 years before I actually tried to question what this extraordinary experience was that I'd had, even though it really in certain ways, it changed my life around. But I didn't actually get into it until quite a while. And then when I did, then that one thing led to Egypt and all of the other work that I've been doing all of these decades.
Well, there's a thing in what they call in the magical society, what they call sigil magic. Sometimes you see all the symbolism. Sometimes I wonder if just the symbols alone, according to like Jungian stuff too, activate something in your consciousness to help wake you up, that give you a certain awareness,
Yep.
I mean, even in the temples, you could see all the symbols that they put around themselves. It would almost seem like they're activators. They're trying to activate something by appearing into these symbols,
They are, absolutely, very definitely. But it's sometimes difficult because they still do their work to this day. When we go there, I mean, even I, with all of these years of study, cannot. I mean, most of the symbolism, it's not living to me, even now, even though I understand a fair amount of it. But other people, when I'm on my trip, normal people who take an interest in this, otherwise they wouldn't be with me getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to start going to these places at the crack of dawn. But they respond to viscerally and emotionally to the geometry, to the music of the temples. The temples are like gigantic symphonies in stone. And even the symbolism, the incredibly complex symbolism of thrones and headdresses and different emblems and symbols. Some of them are like this, and sometimes everything. There's a science of gesture. There's a science of costume. All of these things are pretty opaque to us. I mean, I can ballpark it sometimes, and certain of the things I understand reasonably well, but it has this effect, and a couple of weeks of it really has a lot of effect. And to understand to give an example of how the symbolism works, actually, because we don't have any symbolism anymore, no legit symbolism, but we do have a secular symbolism. And let's say the political cartoon is a good analogy for the sacred symbolism of Egypt or of other countries as well, India, to Tibet, they all have it. But, for example, a good cartoonist, a good political cartoonist, let's say, takes a certain very complicated situation in which, let's say, America and England and Russia and France are all participating in whatever this thing is. I mean, it could be even something modern, terrorism going on, whatever. And the cartoonist uses symbols to, let's say, to represent each of the countries. So you've got Uncle Sam for America and John Bull for England and La Liberté for France, and the Russian bear all cut up into pieces nowadays like Osiris, and they're in a certain juxtaposition. And as long as you're familiar with the political situation that's being symbolized, you get instantly a total picture of what the cartoonist wants you to get. And this is not going to work on somebody from Mars, or let's say an Eskimo who knows nothing about this particular political situation. But for anyone who's initiated into it, reading the newspapers or whatever, you get this terrifically rich picture all in one. It doesn't have to be explained to you. If you try to explain it to somebody, it would take you a month to say, well, he's Uncle Sam because of this, that, and the other, and that's John Bull, and the reason he's portrayed in such and such a way. By the time you got done with 2 months of explanation, the situation would have changed anyhow, and you'd have forgotten why you wanted to study it in the first place. But if you are initiated into it, you get it. And everybody gets it, but the more you know about it, and the more sensitive you are to the situation, the more you get. So whereas it makes sense even to somebody who only watches Fox News, gets some of it.
Yeah.
But somebody who's, a PhD in political philosophy, who's a a commentator on the news and absolutely up on all of the wrinkles and the subtleties of the situation gets a lot more out of it, but everybody gets it in the same way. So that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with ancient symbolism. We're not initiated into it anymore, so we can get bits and pieces of it. We can appreciate the aesthetic beauty of, the incredible precision and the masterful artistry of these things, but the actual message itself doesn't communicate. If we study enough of it, we get some of it, but we still don't get what an Egyptian priest would get walking into one of these temples.
Do you believe that, that it's possible because some of these stories say that you meet your true masters in the astral realm, but, when you read the Egyptian stuff, they didn't just have the astral realm, they had like the Duat and Amenti and all these other places that you could go. The more I study about astral travel, especially with the Monroe Institute and stuff, it seems like that's what they're talking about. They're talking about these different planes of existence, other than just what we're trapped here in the meat body. Right. And I was going to ask you about that and about that, and I wanted to see if you had ever heard a subject called biogeometry. In other words, how the pyramid itself is actually giving off a certain energy, where they say that, that they could lay in the sarcophagus and it would they could leave their body easier. Or, I forget the guy's name, the architect who studies biogeometry, where they were showing they were sharpening razor blades just on pyramids and stuff, and there's nothing there,
That's a different one. I know a bit about that biogeometry. I've read a certain amount about it, and I forget who it is that's talking about. I forget the name of the guy, but yeah, basically that's fundamentally correct. Yes, the pyramid is the reason it is shaped the way that it is and dimensions the way that it is. Yeah, when you go to the King's Chamber, we rent the pyramid for a couple of hours to do a meditation in the King's. And I tell you, you lie down in that coffer, and people around are chanting, or you do a chant. This is a very special place. And yeah, people go somewhere, people get on, people have all kinds of very remarkable experiences in there. Yeah, all of these things, it is it's a good name for it, biogeometry, because we're just as, it works. It's simple in a sense to understand why it works. Goethe, the German poet, came up with the line that architecture is frozen music. This is exactly correct. It's not a poetic metaphor. It really is, because architecture, sacred geometry, the temples are built with everything is in ratio to everything else. So in other words, it's silent music in that it's not resonating. It's not going through your ears, but your whole body is resonating to this complex of geometrical ratios, resolved in stone, and stones of different kinds. Granite is one thing, and limestone another, and sandstone still another. So when you're in there, even though the symbolism itself may be opaque to us, it is putting us, and the ancients understood this. So the so-called gods are not figments of the superstitious imagination, as the quackademeics would have it.
Yeah.
The gods are the embodiments of complex cosmic principles, and their interaction is what creates the geometry, and the geometry is what creates the temple. So when you go into an Amun temple, you get Amun music, and when you go into a Horus temple, you get Horus music. And even if you don't know what it is that you're getting, just as, you listen to a symphony now, if you like classical music, unless you're a musician, you don't really, I don't know music much.
Right.
And I know that Bach does one thing and Beethoven does another, and gangster rap does something quite different. And the reason it does that, though, is all is all frequency and harmony or lack of harmony and so on. So when you go into these wonderful places that are, you're actually, that's the purpose of art. The purpose of art is not self-expression. The purpose of art in the old sense is to put us in touch with these higher levels of consciousness. And that is exactly what we get when we go to Egypt. And when you go to the Gothic cathedrals or the great mosques or the temples of India and so on, all of this stuff was known in very, very ancient times. And through my work and the work of my colleague Robert Schock and Laird Scranton and other friends, Michael Schneider in geometry, there are a number of us out there, Graham Hancock. We're reconfiguring the great sacred science of the ancients. Of course, Shwala Lubitsch and Gurdjieff and so on are preceding us. We're getting a lot of our work from, or clues from them. Mm-hmm. But this is, we like to think, the idea whose time has come, except it hasn't come yet. And our job is to make it come. And to make the idea come, we first have to defeat the idea whose time has not yet gone, which is the entire system that we have fucking our lives up for us.
Right. So I don't know. I've had some guests on here, like Juan Malo Duquette's been on the show. Daniel Joseph has been on the show, and these people believe, and when you say the word magic, right? There's a connotation that goes with that, to especially a fundamentalist who would think right off the top of his head, they relate it straight to evil, right? This is evil. That's devil worship, and this is demonic, yada, yada, yada. But it's obvious that it's got to be real. I mean, even the textbooks, the King James Bible or whatever, if you read Revelations, I mean, there's Egyptian symbology in Revelation. They're talking about the ox, the bull, and the face of the man and the eagle, or out of Egypt I'll call my son. I don't see how that stuff is evil. I mean, do you think we'll ever get past that? Or does that just fall back into that category of these people? It's kind of like playing music to the deaf.
Yeah, no, those people are impenetrable. There's no talking to them, just as there is no talking to a rationalist, materialist, atheistic debunker. These people are, in fact, there's a wonderful saying, one of my favorite all-time sayings. The Sufis are the mystical sect of Islam, have a little book. It's not a book, but it's a series of, and I forget where I read it even, but of apocryphal sayings of Jesus. I mean, Jesus himself, from a scholarly point of view, you can't really prove that even Jesus existed as a human being. Yeah. Good argument to me, both for and against. But one of the sayings of Jesus is, the apocryphal sayings of Jesus is that I can heal the sick, I can make the lame walk and the blind see, I can even raise the dead, but not even I can turn a fool from his foolishness.
Right. Well, speaking of Jesus, doesn't that story of Christ really line up with the older story of Horus in so many ways, it seems like?
It's absolutely identical. And so much so that there are lots of people, beginning with somebody back in the early 19th century, gosh, the name escapes me at the moment, but really an extraordinary scholar, an extraordinary man named Gerald Massey, who wrote a number of books around the turn of the last century. But the one specifically about this question, a massive book called Ancient Egypt, Light of the World, in which he's very spiritual man, but very anti the organized church, which is not contradiction in terms. The church is one thing and the doctrine is quite another. And he was convinced that Jesus was, the whole Jesus story was the turning.
I have that book, I believe. It came from Egypt, right?
Yeah. The whole story was kind of a mistake of sort of making history out of what should be mythology. And I've always thought that was from a strictly scholarly point of view, that's a hard argument to argue against, because the evidence is all there, and there is no physical evidence of a walking, living Jesus. But interestingly enough, I don't know if we even talked about this before. Most of the last year, my last year and a half, has been working with a friend of mine, helping him edit a book recently published. And he had an inoperable brain cancer, and he was racing against time to finish this book, which was a very different book about NDEs. You know what they are, right? And
near-death experience, yeah.
And he was a Christian pastor himself, one of the rare ones who actually walked the walk and talked the talk. Interesting guy, but he had an inoperable brain cancer himself, and he was racing against time to write this book, which he just finished and got published. We self-published it, called The Dead Saints Chronicles. He called it, David Solomon is his name. People should look that up. David Solomon, The Dead Saints Chronicles. And the subtitle was A Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife. And this is one of those books that if it went viral, could tip the balance, because it's the overwhelming evidence. Of course, the quackademeics, the debunkers, will not accept witnesses. I mean, that's how court cases are decided. You have witnesses. But for them, it's no good. You have to be able to measure it and all the rest. This allows them to continue with their pernicious, materialist, fraudulent philosophy. But if you take all of these experiences as the truth, and there are thousands of them, and David did a wonderful job. He was very good as a scholar and as a researcher. What he wasn't was a writer, and this was I came in to help him with the writing part of it. So it's now published. And the subtitle was The Dead Saints Chronicles, a Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife, because he was a Christian pastor, but he studied a lot of Zen. He was a bonsai master, actually, and quite advanced as a Tai Chi practitioner. And then he was very, very, very Christian. He had his own church down in Virginia Beach. And one of the interesting counter arguments, I must say, because I would pretty much take the position that there is no really physical living personages such as Jesus, but an extraordinary number of the near-death experiences, the people who came back to tell the tale, talked about meeting this sort of celestial being up there or whatever realm it was that they accessed, that they recognized as Jesus, and they explain it. And to me, enough people start talking about that sort of thing that it could be that they're right and the scholars are wrong. On the other hand, it also could be that because people are acculturated, and sometimes people who are not Christian, who are actually either atheist or unreligious or Jewish or Muslim even, would encounter in that near-death state, in that altered state, a Jesus. So I had to sort of not quite rethink. I mean, it seems to me possible that because this whole notion of Jesus is so ingrained, so embodied in modern day, even in the religions that are not even in other religions, this figure or this concept of a Jesus is so powerfully ingrained that when people died, literally, they did die, and we're in this altered state of consciousness, they perceived these celestial beings and interpreted them as the living Jesus. That's a possibility. Meanwhile, that's their experience, and I'm not in a position to argue with their experience. It's funny, actually, with this NDE stuff, that you have all kinds of assholes out there who've not experienced this, who are calling it a hallucination or something. I mean, these are To believe them, it's like buying a cookbook by someone who's never fried an egg. Who the hell are they?
Well, they want you to believe that there's no such thing as miracles or magic, but just give them that one miracle, and they can explain everything else. You know.
That's right. Oh yeah, yeah. Yep,
but I tend to believe that, like you were saying, I tend to believe that Christ is this thing that's inside us all, and there was a story written about it, and maybe he did incarnate in certain people and stuff. I really believe that Christ itself, because I don't want to say himself, is real, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what made me believe that to the point to where I'm sold is when I saw the statue that you showed in the museum of Horus. And I don't know what these statues were made out of, but they were smooth, black, what was it, denite? What did you call it?
Diorite.
Diorite, that's right. And it showed the pharaoh sitting there, and if you went around the back, it had Horus wrapped around his head, right? And Horus was in the spot of what the Bible calls the upper room, right? You know, there's a verse in the Bible where he says, if you see the man with a pitcher of water, come into the upper room and I'll meet you there, right? Some people think that's a guy walking up the hill with a pitcher of water. I tend to believe it's Aquarius, the age that we're in, and maybe I'm wrong about that. But
could be. Yeah.
Horus is the story of Christ to a T, you know, I mean, and it's so much older. It's how are we not seeing? How do people not? I guess I'm just going to have to go with you. I'm going to have to stop beating myself over the head and wonder why people are just not. Because it's probably slowing me down learning. Because it takes up a part of my brain. I'm bothered by people that just don't care about the cosmos. They don't look up. They don't look at the sky. They don't wonder who they are and how they got here. They don't think with their brain or with their heart, like you say, at all. You know.
It's a waste of your good time. It's a waste of my good time. I pay attention to that stuff because professionally, that's the battle I'm fighting, literally, and that's okay. I can handle it without getting upset by it. But it is actually pretty upsetting. But the line I just quoted, the Sufi saying, you cannot, not even I, can turn a fool from his foolishness. If Jesus couldn't do it, who are we to do it?
Right.
Nothing is going to change them. Or put another way, you do not try to put a mad dog through an obedience training course.
That's right. That's a good way to think about it. Do you believe that? And this comes from Danny, who wanted to ask you this, that the Kabbalistic tree of life has anything to do or correlates in any way to the Egyptian mythology or the Egyptian symbolism or anything?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, oh, sure. It's very, very similar to a whole bunch of the birds in the net. It's a hunt. It's called a trapping scene that's supposed to be daily life, but it's not. There are lots of correlations. The numbers correlate. The interplay between the numbers correlate. I don't have it well enough in the top of my head, but there's a substantial literature on the correspondences between the Tree of Life and Kabbalah and Egypt. For sure, it's all there.
And as far as the Hebrew religion goes, there's some people that believe that comes out of Egypt or that era. That one stumps me too, the Hebrew religion, you know, because it goes back, I don't know if it goes back to the Canaanites, but in the beginning of all their stories, there's Egypt, right? And Egypt is depicted, or Pharaoh is depicted as this person that's enslaved, you know, the Hebrews. And that's never sat good with me because so many pharaohs were wonderful people that, you know, like the story of Joseph that rose him up and raised him. And it was just that one Pharaoh in the story of Moses, by the way, who God hardened his heart. He didn't have a hard heart. God hardened his heart in the story. Yeah, but, you know, I wonder where that religion comes from, because when you look at all that stuff, even the Hebrew language itself, it looks like the old Babylonian fire text, you know. I tend to think that they got a lot of their stuff from Egypt. I mean, I don't think Egypt is the answer to everything, but I think it's pretty close.
Well, it's not the answer to everything, but actually the work of Lad Stranton, which is somebody you should look into, because he's got a number of books out that really that demonstrate, that connects to our whole hypothesis of the lost civilization that's much, much older, that civilization has their complete cosmology, that everybody has it, and then it fragments when there's this big catastrophe around 10,000 BC that puts an end to the global civilization. But there are enough people, enough survivors of it, that they settle here and they settle there, and they devise their own, let's say, their own variants, their own versions of the same story. And then Laird comes along and starts putting together those versions, showing that this extremely sophisticated scientific cosmology exists in the very, very most ancient of times. So there's nothing surprising about the Hebrews having this, exactly where they get it. And then again, I tend to try to stay away from a lot of the biblical arguments, because it's a minefield. It's a scholarly minefield, and nobody's going to change their minds anyway. And with Judaism, even within Judaism, the Orthodox rabbis will have nothing to do with the Kabbalists, and the Kabbalists, they take, it's the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible that are the key. I'm not sure if that's the Torah in its entirety, but the rest of the Old Testament is a bloodbath. I mean, who would want to worship a God that behaves like that? I mean, you might as well have Donald Trump as a God.
Yeah, kill all the women and children and everybody's firstborn, and then we'll be everything will be okay after that. Yeah. Right?
If you take that literally, it's a nightmare. Mm-hmm. But Genesis and Exodus books. I mean, I don't know what to make of Numbers, Deuteronomy, but those books are clearly cosmological. Obviously cosmological. There's a very interesting guy, very difficult stuff, named Stan Tenen, who's written extensively about the origins of the Hebrew alphabet, very Orthodox Jewish himself. And I forget the name of his book, where he goes deep into the cosmology that's written into the language itself. Very, very interesting stuff. But as I said, not easy. He's not a great communicator. But anyway, it is all there, and as I said, there's a ton of stuff in Kabbalah. It's just, you can't know everything, and so it's nothing that I've studied in great depth myself, because it just didn't particularly serve my purposes. Even though I am, in fact, by birth, I'm Jewish myself, but it just didn't attract me. Just as actually Tibetan Buddhism is wonderful, brilliant, sophisticated, powerful, but it's just not my personal path. So you can't follow all the paths to get up the mountain.
It is a landmine. There is a lot of people out there that think that Akhenaten could have been the story of Moses or something close to it, because I believe, I may be wrong about this, but Akhenaten was one of the pharaohs that tried to bring the first worship of one divine being, or bring all the gods together into one thing. But when you look at all the evidence of that, I mean, are we speculating on that, or are we just
speculating totally? And in fact, I've always been anti-Akhenaten, simply because the artwork is, to me, so repugnant, and the artists don't lie. But recently, my pal Charlie Herzog wrote a book about the Osirian, very anti-Akhenaten. I mean, he was kind of a loony fundamentalist who wasn't trying to worship the one God. He was trying to say basically that he was the God, that he was associated with the sun disk, the physical sun disk. Anyhow, just recently, only a few days ago, there was a really interesting archaeological survey of the Akhetaten, the ruined city of Akhenaten, and they'd done a major sort of archaeological work proving that Akhenaten was I mean, he was starving his own people to death. He was a monster, tyrant. And I mean, and I figured this out for myself just from the artwork, but I couldn't prove it. But now it's really all there, that this is an early 20th century conceit that he was the good guy. Again, this goes back to the whole thing of the Church of Progress, that even people who weren't the quackademeics, who weren't themselves religious, had to convince themselves that the gods of Egypt were sort of superstition, and along came this one good guy who wanted to set up a religion where there was just one God. Actually, the Egyptian religion is itself absolutely monotheistic, and that all of the other so-called gods, as soon as you change their names to cosmic principles, the whole thing disappears. The argument disappears, because the cosmic principles are an incredibly complex series, let's say, of divine attributes. Islam, they have the 99 names of Allah. All of them, the Indian the philosophy, Hinduism, has the same thing of all of the different gods. This is not polytheism. It's actually just a sophisticated understanding of the tremendous complexity of divine creation.
Right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, and if you look at Judaism, they never said the word God. They said Elohim, which means many gods. You know, that's male and female forms of gods too, actually, that if you look at the etymology of it. So it's, it's just another thing that you got to, like you said, man, I can spend hours wasting my mental energy on wondering why people won't look at it. Instead, what I would need to do is spend my time trying to figure out how I can get to go on one of these trips. I mean, we don't have much time left, but, can you kind of tell us how you do that? I mean, is it like, do you just go all around Egypt, or do you just visit certain temples, or?
We go to the main. We go to practically all of the really important sites, which are spread along the Nile. I mean, it's very easy to do that, and it's I've been doing this for 35 years. How long? Maybe now 30 some odd years, and so I've got it honed down to knowing exactly where we want to go at what particular time. And so we go through it. And it's like, it's like listening in a way, in terms of the effect. It's like listening to all of Beethoven, all of Bach, and all of Mozart through really good cans, so that nothing else is coming in except the power of these extraordinary resonating temples. And that's what we do. So, it's a crash course, as it were, in civilization. And, people go on my website and find it. And as I said, I've got quite a few empty berths left. And there's one coming up on October 20th. But also for you, I don't know how big an audience you have. I have an incentive, open incentive. If you get 10, but you put 10 people together, paying people, you get a freebie.
Oh wow! Okay, we can figure that out, man. I'm telling you, I believe in the magical wheel. I set my mind to it. I can get it done.
It's less. You think, you start talking about it, everybody's interested. All of a sudden, it comes to the crunch. Well, they can't do this. Somebody's getting married. They're sick. Their wife is
right.
Nowadays, their family. People should do something about their family. Incarcerate their families. Their family say, their families, oh, it's so dangerous. How can you go? It's so dangerous. I'm so worried about you. Your family doesn't know fuck all about what's going on.
Right.
No position to say that it's dangerous. They're listening to the prostitutes of the media and the stupid government that has its own agenda that's keeping people frightened, instead of pointing out that, hey, even I would not want to get parachuted into Syria these days wearing cowboy boots and a Stetson hat, waving an American flag. I wouldn't want that. But Egypt, yes, something could happen, but something can happen every time you walk out into your local Walmarts or your local Price Chopper or whatever. This is much more dangerous than anything that's going on in Egypt.
Well, I mean, you've been? I'm going for how long now?
Yeah, 35 years.
I mean, you're still you still look like you're okay. You got all your limbs and stuff, right?
I'm in pretty good shape for my age. Yes.
So, I wonder though. Do you? I mean, I don't know. Do you get to see the pyramids or anything at night? I don't know. I'm a nighttime person. I would love to go out there and just see the sky with the pyramid. Not look at it in a picture, but just actually be there. You know.
They light it up at night, which is sort of destroys the whole thing. Certainly the temple up too, which is an improvement because you can see the reliefs and stuff. Mm-hmm. But no, and anyhow, nowadays because of security, used to be you could go up on the plateau anytime you wanted, and wander around. It's actually pretty dangerous because you can fall into open shafts and stuff like that. But nowadays you really can't because they're security, and there are loonies out there. As I call them, the Muslim imbeciles. Who talk about.
You got a name for everybody, don't you?
I'm a writer. That's my job.
That's good. It's funny.
Yeah, but these are stupid people. They want to blow up the pyramids. Good luck. But,
right.
Anyway, there are such people floating around, but we rent the pyramid for 2 hours for a meditation session, which is pretty breathtaking. And we go to certain other places. The Sphinx, it's expensive, but it's part of the trip. One of the reasons the trip is expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not outrageous for what it is. But we go and have private sessions, a private couple of hours at the Great Sphinx itself before any people can come. And we go right into the enclosure where you're not allowed to go, just on your own. So I've set it up because I've been doing it for so long in such a way that we're often at temples first or at times of the day when I know that they're going to be empty. And now it's still tourism. The prostitutes have everyone scared away. So it's pretty. So they are. They have everyone scared away. So it's still pretty empty there. And there's a big difference of going to Egypt when it's empty and going there when it's like the Super Bowl. So,
yeah. How many people go with you? How many people can you take, max?
So max is 24, and I won't go unless I've got 10 because it just didn't pay. Mostly these days I'm getting 18, 20, which is perfect. And 24, it's fine too. More than 24, it gets logistically awkward. I used to do bigger trips, but if I get 16, 18 people, I'm quite happy. And I don't have 16, 18 for this upcoming trip. I've got 12 so far, but a month to go still. So anybody listening in and wants to jump in, go to my website, jawest.net. And if you have any questions, you call me up. All my information's there. And,
I mean, the only thing that I'm afraid of was going. Okay, I'll just be honest with you. The only thing that I'm afraid of, and because I'm going to go. I hope it's on one of your trips. That's what I want to do because I'm a big fan of yours. I want to go, but here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid I'm going to love it so much that I'm going to have to increase my income to that point so I can go every year because I know how I am.
Well, this happens, actually. People do get bitten by the bug. But for you, if you've got an audience out there, you get enough people together and you get a freebie. But otherwise, you'll have to figure out a way to get your income going. What do you do for a day job? Obviously, you don't make it out of your show.
No, I mean, no. I would love to, and that's another goal. But right now, it just pays. The advertising pays to run it. But I work in tier 2 tech level support for, let's just say, a major cell phone company.
Right. Okay.
So when people you call customer service and your iPad's broken and the first guy can't fix it, then they send you to me.
Okay. Well, that sounds like as jobs go, not bad.
Yeah, it's still a cubicle 9 to 5
Well,
I'm dying inside job, though. I can tell you that right now. When I watch you on YouTube, or if I see you on an interview or in anything, I'm thinking, this man right here, this man has got the life. He's going to Egypt every year. He's doing what he loves.
I am doing what I love, and I've managed since I first started getting published to do nothing but that. But I've paid a price because I tell you, I've had my back financially. I've had my back against the wall from the very beginning, and I've never been other than that. And if you think it's fun having your back to the financial wall, somehow something happens, and I'm okay. But only just, and I've learned to accommodate that because you can get pretty depressed and broke all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I know the feeling. So you're like the, what's his name off Star Wars? You're always trying to get something going, huh? What's the guy, that Harrison Ford played? I don't know why I can't think of his name,
Yeah. Indiana Jones.
Well, not Indiana Jones, but you've seen Star Wars before, right? Han Solo. Han Solo is always going somewhere, having to work something up. I feel that way, so I know what you're talking about,
Yeah, that's very, very typical. But listen, you when you find your mission, as it were, or when it finds you, you don't find it. You can't look for it. It happens. Then you have to do it. That's all. I mean, and I've been lucky in the sense that I've never, in all of these years, my first short story was published when I was 25, so that's almost 60 years ago. I just turned 84. And during that whole time, I've never had to, it's been close, but I've never had to do anything other than what I do.
I don't understand how these projects that you come up with are not getting funded. I was listening to you on Jimmy Church. You guys listen to that show. It's one of my favorite shows. Is Jimmy Church's Fade to Black, right? And when you're talking about some of these movie projects that you're wanting to do and get funding for, I would be like, oh, man, I would love to see that, How do you get this stuff done, man?
Well, I'm actually, on a personal level, I'm incredibly inefficient about organizing stuff. I'd often tell people that I'm one of those rare people with two Achilles heels, and both of them are organization. So stuff takes me 2 and 3 years to do that anybody else with better organizing skills would do in a year or 6 months or something. So it's partly my own fault, but
at least you're honest. At least you're honest about it.
And I'm hoping, it looks as though I'm kind of gathering people around me who are going to really try to get some of these projects off the ground, because I feel that it's not just, it is a personal thing, of course, naturally, it's what I do, but I really do feel that it could be instrumental in defeating the idea whose time has not yet gone, and that no civilization is possible unless it is spiritually based, unless enough people not just know intellectually or understand emotionally, but actually are doing the work involved in trying to get to this higher level of consciousness. And unless at least some people are trying to do that, and ideally getting there, I'm not there, I work at it, unless that becomes a real movement, the quackademics are going to stay in charge. The debunkers are going to debunk, and nothing's going to get them out of there. But
you know what? I think you just need a better. In all honesty, I mean, you've got some gems out there. That book that the case for astrology. I've been looking for that book my whole life, and I'm a big fan of yours. So, you have to understand. I think it's all a marketing thing that you got to get some kind of better marketing platform to get this stuff going, because people are missing out. I mean, Serpent in the Sky. If you just read the reviews on that, just on Amazon, there's not a bad review on that book.
Well, it is that is out there, but it's a trickle. I can't live off that. And the other the money night is you're absolutely right, but who's going to do the marketing? Not me. Somebody has to do the marketing for me. And
look, man, I'm a big fan of yours. I already told you. I told you before the show, I will help you in any way I can. You know, I consulted for a lot of online startups and stuff, too, as far as internet marketing goes. And there's one other person I'm a fan of I gave that offer to, and I'll give it to you publicly. I will help you in any way you need. And all you got to do is hit me up, and I will do it.
Let's discuss, because we're looking into this, and I've got a couple of friends who are really keen to help and who have that kind of knowledge. I mean, there's no money in the till at the moment. I mean,
I know that, but it's really from somebody like you that needs to stay focused on your research and needs to stay focused on your tours and your research and your speeches. I mean, when you're talking marketing and demographics and keyword research to try to get the traffic and all that stuff, you're talking about stuff that you really don't need to be spending your time doing in the first place. I don't think,
I'm incapable of doing it, but I understand how it's supposed to be done, and I now have some people who are sounding. And now you see, with crowdfunding and stuff like that, there are now possibilities that weren't there even just 5 years ago. So if I get some people to organize that kind of stuff, I've often felt that if I lived long enough, I'd outlive the gremlins, and I could start getting some of these things going. But anyway, Joe, I'll take you at it's appreciated, the offer, and I have your number, and we can stay in touch, and I may be able to.
Absolutely, I'll send you an email with every one of my skills that I know how to do, and then you can just pick. That's what I'm willing to do.
Please do, and I'll show this my friend, my son, among other people who would be very happy to add, bring a group of knowledgeable people with different skill sets together, and stuff starts happening. It just doesn't start happening with just me.
Yeah, and it would be nice for me to do it for something that I care about, because I've had people that want to do like shoe companies and, sell, I don't know, pills or something, and want me to help them with that. And I don't care about none of that stuff. And I've done that for free, just because they were my friends. To do it for a passion would be wonderful,
No, you got a job.
But, no, I guess I've went over all the questions here, and we're about to have to wrap this up. You're going to be at, what is that, CPAC? You're going to be there. What, did I get the dates right on that?
I think so. It's the 30th to
the September. It says September 27th through October the 1st is what it says.
No, wait, that's not quite right. September. I'm getting there. Wait a minute.
Or maybe it's September the 30th through the 2nd.
September the 30th. It's Friday, and Friday night there's sort of a get together and introducing and things like that. But the lectures are the Saturday and the Sunday. So that's going on, and that's in. You Google it up. CPAC 2016, CPAK, or Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, and it's in Southern California, a place, the intriguing name of Rancho Mirage, which is near. Somewhere near Palm Springs. So that will be an interesting, very interesting, and there are interesting people going to be there. Robert Chalk, my colleague, will be there, and a couple of other, Chris Dunn, this technology, and who else? A very interesting sounding guy whose work I've not read, called David Matheson, but he sounds sound, and a whole bunch of interesting speakers. And it's always a lively social gathering, and you can talk to people and schmooze. And
you got on here on your website, it says, I will divulge much new law civilization news and discuss major developments in our ongoing battle to the death with the quackademic establishment and its dreaded paradigm police.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and you're also going to be on the Joe Rogan Experience, I believe, on the 27th, right?
Right. Yes, very much so. And Joe is I've been on there once before, and it was always great fun because he's a stand-up comedian, and apart from a martial arts guy. And actually, I've done some stand-up myself. Actually,
have you?
Yeah. It went reasonably well, and because I'm so disorganized, nobody came up to me with a contract, and it was a lot of work, and I never sort of refined it enough or tried to push it to do it. But it was, and we talked about certain of the things here. The name of the show was called Stand Up Metaphysics 2.0.
Oh, that's cool.
So it was sort of, there were lots of jokes, but a whole sort of what makes things funny. And I might be talking about that a bit with Joe. I don't know. We'll see. Because it's always
on your last show with him. You almost, I was waiting because when you brought up, he started talking about Darwinism, right? And most people, when you get into a conversation, especially with somebody that's an alpha male like Rogan, who, by the way, inspired everything about my show and what I'm doing, but I'm a big fan. But he has certain scientific views, right? And he started talking about Darwinism, and most people will just kind of, they'll fade it out, because they don't want to get into any controversy or whatever. And you hit it on the head. You were like, that's a total quack job. I mean, you were just like, you just hit it head on. That's a total quack job. It's fraud. And you could see him. He's just kind of, he wanted to make sure he understood what you was talking about because he would have debated you on that one.
We'll see. Maybe we'll get into it. Evolution is a fact. Mm-hmm. This is Darwinian evolution via natural selection is a fraud. And it's not very difficult to demonstrate that. And even the fact is conditioned by certain factors and how you look at it and so on, that life apparently goes from the simplest organisms to the most complex, with breaks in between when the cosmic events happen and that sort of thing. This is pretty well established, but what is not established is where the consciousness comes from. And that is a conditioning factor. It doesn't impinge upon the facts, but it puts the facts into a different light if it's understood that nothing happens without consciousness as the preeminent, all-encompassing quality, which the ancients knew about in every ancient society that ever was, and all of the simple, the relatively simple or seemingly simple traditional societies. It's always understood that consciousness, by whatever name, the gods or the spirits or the whatever, is the primordial initiating factor of the whole thing. Without that, it's all bullshit.
Right.
But this is what we're dealing with. This is the idea whose time has not yet gone. So, God did not say, let there be mosquitoes, and there were mosquitoes. It's not quite like that, like a fundamental.
Right. Well, listen, it's been a great honor and a great pleasure to have you on, and I will, hopefully be talking to you again on any help you need with that stuff. And then that, I look forward to your show. I probably won't make it out to California, but I will probably watch the Rogan show,
Okay, we'll watch it and tell people, and much appreciated. And Joe, the chances are pretty good you will hear from me.
Okay, good.
Send me a thing that with your various skills and stuff, because the chances are that we can use that.
Yeah, I'll definitely help. I mean, it gives me something to do out here in Bushwhack, Arkansas. It gives me a little bit more purpose, because I'm around a lot of what you call, what was it? What was the word for it, man, that you called it? Fuck it. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly Dumpfuckistan. Now, look, I've got plenty of people out here that have the brains and intelligent and all that, but I'm telling you right now, buddy, when you get down here in these woods, it's best to stay indoors if you want to have an intelligent conversation sometimes,
It's not that different around here. It is different, yeah. As I said, there's greater Dumpfuckistan and there's lesser Dumpfuckistan. But it's all Dumpfuckistan.
Well, thanks for coming out again, and I hope we can have you back on the show one day in the near future when you're not busy,
Well, I hope you find your way out to a way to get to Egypt.
Oh, I will. That's
Okay.
going to happen. That's going to happen. And what's that?
As long as I can keep climbing up the pyramid, I'm game. I'll be doing it.
All right. Thanks again for coming out. It's been an awesome conversation.
Very welcome. Thank you.
That's John Anthony West, folks.